The Witching Hour. I am Perri Nemiroff, and this is my co-host, Haleigh Fouch.
Hello.
Haleigh, have you recovered from our weekend?
Yes.
We'll get into a little bit. Yeah, I feel like there's actually a reason to bring up what we did this weekend in this episode of The Witching Hour, and I feel like I'm confusing you, but I'm gonna make it happen, and it's gonna be a really natural transition. Just watch.
I can't wait.
So our topic for this week is John Carpenter movies, and we're not gonna cover them all, but we did want to recognize a small handful because Halloween clearly. A small handful? Is that what I just said? As I said it, I'm like, what is happening? A small handful. Because Halloween crushed it this weekend, and we wouldn't have that movie without him. So we wanted to look at some of his other filmography. And before we even jump into that, I need to let you guys know that we've got a giveaway going on right now. We are giving away copies of the Mandy Blu-ray. So if you have yet to enter to win one of those, there is still time. All you have to do is tweet, reshare, whatever, this episode of Collider Witching Hour on Twitter using the hashtag Collider Witching Hour and Mandy. So if you do that, you will be entered to win, and we will pick some people at random. So good luck for you guys with that one. Now let's talk about John Carpenter. Do you want to introduce our first movie? Because I don't know which one we're starting with.
Oh, I was like, I'll make that up. So
we have a small handful, so make sure you choose the right one.
Wisely. I go with my heart, which is Big Trouble in Little China, is a film just so rooted into my concept of person at this point. I watched it so much as a kid, and it was something me and my dad would watch together all the time. This is before I even knew that John Carpenter was a horror guy. I loved Big Trouble Little China, which is what I called it. And, yes, and that movie spawned my deep, deep love for Kurt Russell, which stems to a lot of, John Carpenter's best films. But I love that side of John Carpenter that I think people don't think about a lot, this sort of goofier, bright, vibrant, zany, colorful element to his films that, he is a horror master, but he does other things really well, too.
Yeah. I mean, we're not going to talk about it yet, but even They Live has some of those qualities to it also. I don't know. With Big Trouble, though, I never did watch it when I was younger. I watched it when I decided I wanted to see most, if not all, of John Carpenter's movies, and I can't really say it's for me, but there's, there's moments in it that I appreciate. I could definitely second what you said about the whole Kurt Russell thing, because it doesn't matter what movie he's in, especially when you're talking about times when he's teamed with Carpenter. There's just something about him in all those movies that my heart melts, and he's wonderful.
Oh my gosh,
and he's the ideal leading man in those. Big Trouble in Little China is a little zany for my taste and a little heavy on the martial arts, which, that's the whole point of it. It's to, to show that off and to exude a love for that. And I totally get that. And I embrace it to a degree. But when it comes to personal taste, that is not necessarily what I gravitate towards.
That is me up and down and all over.
I didn't know that about you.
Oh my gosh,
Do you so when, because sometimes when we're talking about, for some reason, the TIFF Midnight Madness lineup is coming to mind, and normally they have some sort of, extreme martial arts movie part of that lineup. Do you still like all that too?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. That's a huge part of my whole, all the genre stuff is what I grew up loving, but it was really horror and action. Well, and I try to say that, and I go, but sci-fi too. And then I read fantasy books all the time, but fantasy movies, not so much. Action, yes. That was me and my dad would watch action all the time.
Fantasy movies, I'm associating it with horror at this point. So fantasy movies you don't like in terms of, I don't know, let's say Lord of the Rings, or are we talking like Pan's Labyrinth?
Oh, no, sorry. I don't mean that I don't like them, because I fucking love them.
Oh, okay.
I mean that, when I grew up, they weren't as big a presence. I got my fantasy from books when I was growing up. I feel like fantasy movies really got popular when we were a little older, the wave of Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter and all that brought more and more and more of them.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Because I guess now that I'm thinking about it, I can't remember watching too many when I was young either. Right. And I didn't read when I was younger, so it wasn't coming from books either.
Well, you can't tell.
Well, I still don't read now. I only listen to audiobooks. But one of the things that, even though I don't love Big Trouble in Little China, one of the things in rewatching it this weekend that really wowed me is, and really across the board, all of the movies movies that I rewatched this week, in addition to the ones that I watch frequently that we're not even going to cover today, but is how well his movies hold up. Like there's certain elements I think that, you know, maybe are in PC today, or effects that might look a little dated when you consider what digital effects can do now and things like that. But it's about the performances and the way something's shot and the score. And I think when you have certain elements that are kind of at a certain level, it doesn't matter how old a movie gets. It doesn't matter what point you are in your life. There's still something that holds up especially well about the large majority of his filmography.
I agree. It's very... I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head that I think doesn't hold up, but I can't pull one right now.
I was about to say The Ward, but that never held up for me to begin with. So
that didn't hold at all. You know, there are definitely elements of Big Trouble in Little China that are not politically correct these days. But what I find interesting is that even in '86, he was like already... So the point of the movie is that Jack Burton's an idiot. He doesn't know what he's doing, and he's way out of his element. It's not like he's the white savior coming in to help all, you know, this other culture. He's a fool. And he's, you know, he's covered in lipstick, shooting rocks onto his own head. Like, he's just a dumb guy.
And all he wants is his truck back.
And it's his sidekick who's kind of always saving his ass.
And he's badass.
Yeah.
Throughout the entire movie.
I love it, and I think it's more woke than it gets credit for, just because Jack Burton is not supposed to be the, like, well, let the strapping white lead come in and fix your problem for you.
Yeah.
He's half the problem.
He is definitely not capable of that.
No.
I mean, it's pretty much only the people that are around him that have any chance at fixing the problem. It's actually, in rewatching it, I'm surprised they let him come along at all. Because, like, wouldn't you think that they could just, like, go in and get it all done a little quicker without him?
I don't think they have a choice. Jack Burton goes where he wants to go.
And I'm perfectly fine with that.
What does he say at one point? Everybody relax, I'm here.
There's a couple of, I wish I wrote them down. There were so many random one-liners in that movie that I'm like, this is just, like, batshit and nuts and kind of wacky.
Funny. Yeah, it's very much my shit, like the comedy, the action, the Kurt.
Did you buy the Funko Pops?
I have one. I have a Funko Pop rule that unless they're given to me, I only purchase Kurt Russell Funkos. So there's only 3.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
How did I not know this?
It keeps me from buying any.
Wait. So I'm assuming there's a Big Trouble one.
Yes.
There's the Thing one? Is
yes.
there one?
Yes. It's that, because they're not necessarily the ones you'd expect. Yes, it's that. It's McGrady.
Ego?
You know what? I don't think there is a McGrady. I think it's Ego. It's what's his name from The Hateful Eight.
Ah, they made Hateful Eight Funko Pops, didn't they?
Yeah, and then it's Big Trouble. There is no Escape from New York, which is
that's kind of crazy.
Ridiculous.
You think there would be?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, and know the thing. So get your life together, Funko. I have one ask, and it's Kurt Russell Pops.
I have a rule when it comes to Funko Pops. Keep buying them until there's no place to store them. That's why I have a problem, and nobody should listen to what I'm doing. Speaking of Kurt Russell, do you want to jump into the next movie on the list?
Yes.
Which is it's a major favorite for both of us. It's The Thing.
Yes.
And I love that we had double excuses to rewatch The Thing. That movie is just, like, it never, ever, in the slightest bit, feels dated to me. Like, it never loses any of that charm, that appeal of the first time I ever saw it. Because the first time I saw it, surprise, surprise, I was way too young to be watching it. And, I mean, this is what everybody pretty much talks about to this day. It's the practical effects are absolutely mind-blowing. Because at the point in time when I had watched The Thing, I had already seen some shit in horror movies, shit that I shouldn't have seen. But I had never seen anything quite like that. Just creature work and human distortion like that. And it wasn't even just about the gross out visuals. It was about the gross out visuals, but also the way everything in that movie gets into your head. The idea of not being able to trust anybody around you. That always, it's like visually, it messed with my head, but it also got under my skin too. And that is the perfect combination.
It really is. And he does tension, I think, better than almost any filmmaker. Like, I don't know why he's not held up in the regard of, like, some people like Scorsese or something like that. Like, nobody does tension as well as he does.
Yeah.
Nobody builds it as well as he does. And I mean, if you look at a period of his films around the late 70s through the mid 80s, good luck finding a better filmmaker with a better run. Like, incredible. Anyway, I digress. Yeah, the tension building, especially in the famous blood test scene, is really spectacular. I love. You can even see at that scene that they don't trust themselves anymore, not just each other. They don't know what's happening. The acting is really. I think people, when they think of old hyper-masculine performances like John McClane or Kurt Russell in these movies, they tend to think of him a certain way that's a little bit more like Jack Burton, really. But in The Thing, there's a lot. He's very vulnerable. Like, he's scared all the time. Just like, John McClane was in the middle of a divorce and crying. Like, he's not a super tough guy in the first film. He's actually very emotional and vulnerable. And I think that's what makes it work so well when this tension gets put on them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is, it's always a lot of fun to watch some, super, super buff, seemingly indestructible hero, plow through enemies or something like that. But if we're talking about something, especially something as atmospheric as The Thing, where you want that feeling to be consumed and scared as much as you need a hero to root for, if that hero isn't scared, it's going to suck all the tension out of the room.
Yeah, and I think it's just something I've noticed. There's a misunderstanding of what a badass on film has always meant. Like, they didn't always used to be Vin Diesel in, the Fast and the Furious, where he is indestructible force of muscle.
Like The Rock.
Yeah. For a while, they were just smaller, more everymen who were scared as shit, but just stood up to the thing.
Now that I'm thinking about it, I'm trying to go through the list in my head of current major action heroes we have, and I think maybe it's just a sign of the times and kind of what people are gravitating towards right now in terms of where they spend their dollars at the box office. But most of the major action heroes I could think of right now are basically super strong, indestructible types, and not anybody with some vulnerabilities.
I thought that Upgrade was a really nice.
That's a good
not
one.
that he's an action star, but
like
an action sci-fi film where they went back to more just a normal guy in a terrible situation who fights it.
That's a good example. I mean, I guess they try to work it in Skyscraper for The Rock a little bit.
Yeah, but he's still The Rock.
He's still The Rock. I think that's part of the reasons why I appreciate that movie of his more than some of the other recent ones. I think it actually makes it a better film, but it's still not the same.
And people were a little rough on that movie. I mean, it's not like a Oscar nominee in the making, but it was pretty good. I think summer action movie.
Yeah, it basically successfully achieved what I think it set out to achieve from the beginning. Curious, what's your favorite scene in The Thing?
So I think it is the blood test. I rewatched that a lot. It's one of those funny things where you go to YouTube and you look it up, and I'm always like, oh yeah, I watched this not too long ago. Like, the link is still purple.
It makes me feel so much better that someone else has had that thought.
That one, there's so many good ones. And the dog transformation.
Yeah.
What about you?
So actually, the one that gets me the most is the scene with Bennings when he opens his mouth really big. Because, that's the first moment. And it's also a moment that is, right on the cusp of human and not human. And when you realize how close to accurate that transformation can be, and the idea of, this is legit, you really might not be able to tell who's who at a point. I feel like also, because that comes kind of early in the movie, that was the first time when the whole concept really sunk in and kind of... I guess knocked me off balance, and it puts you on edge in a way for the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
And also that look on his face just used to freak me out.
I can't blame you for that. I just think it's a very near perfect film, to be honest. And any scene you could pick and I would go, oh yeah, that's a favorite too. I can't think of a criticism I would levy against The Thing as a technical work.
So, for the record, would it be one of your favorite horror movies of all time?
It would be.
Okay.
It would be. It's my usual go-to answer. I'm like, well, it's either The Thing or Alien, and then those I think are best, and favorite is Scream. So it's
Everyone knows Scream tops my list, but The Thing would be in the mix for me as well.
Well, I think there's, when people ask me what's the best horror movie, I'll say The Thing or Alien, and what's my favorite is Scream. if that makes sense.
It's such a frustrating thing to have to answer. And I feel like I go through that at the end of every year, too. It's also because, it's only October, but we're already discussing end of the year content because you just got to get prepared. And it's just every single time it comes to making my end of the year list, it's always this inevitable push-pull between best versus favorite because, the film lover in me wants to recognize a movie for its technical prowess or a seamless script or something like that. But really, these lists, to me at least, are all about personal passion. So that winds up, basically superseding the best for me, and my lists wind up being my favorite.
I always do my favorite. I also... So I'm going to contradict myself, but that's just because I suck.
Not when you put it that way.
I'm not sure that I actually believe in best movies anyway.
Yeah.
Like when I think about what makes Alien or The Thing the best, I just can't think of any films that are more impressive on every technical detail. But when I try to really think of all the movies in the world where you don't share an objective, at least The Thing and Alien are both horror movies. They're creature films. They're monster movies. So they share an objective I can compare. Of all the movies in the world to say this is the best one out of dramas and comedies and horror and all the different objectives films have, I struggle with that a lot.
You're tapping into why I'm always so not eager, hesitant maybe to give A's in my reviews. It's just, there's always something that goes through my mind where it's unless I walk out of a movie feeling super confident and saying this was a game changer for me, this is an A for sure, which very, very rarely happens. I walk out thinking, my opinion is going to change over time. They could have done this little thing differently to make it a little stronger. I can't compare it to everything out there. Who am I to call a piece of art perfect?
Right.
It's this whole swarm of ideas that pull me away from that A wind up circling in my mind. So it's a very unheard of kind of experience for me to walk out and be like, damn right, that was an A.
I agree. I try to also keep the A's. A's. I don't give a lot of A's, but I've only given ever 2 A+, and that's because how many perfect movies are there? But also, I think we shouldn't. It's a Collider thing that we grade on a letter scale, and I think that carries all this other baggage of
because
you feel
even
bad.
Well, it's also the confusion comes, and I'm sorry, we're way off topic, but I'm very engaged in this conversation right now. It's also because I think many out there associate letter grades with what they were like in school.
Absolutely.
And that would mean, an F is in the 50, could be in the 50 range, right? So the numbers don't necessarily align with when you have to transfer that score to an X out of 10.
Yeah.
And I think that just causes some confusion. You also have to factor in Rotten Tomatoes, which makes one thing fresh versus one thing being rotten. But, certain grades were pass or failing, and it just doesn't all align perfectly. And it's also a matter of everybody's grade is their own personal grade. My letter grade for, let's say, a B isn't the same exact thing to you.
No way.
There's nothing wrong with that. That's why there are many film critics out there.
Yeah, exactly.
Huh.
Yeah.
That was refreshing. I don't know. I felt like I wanted to have that conversation.
I'm
all of a
glad
sudden.
that we did.
Back to Carpenter, though.
Back to The Thing.
Anything else about The Thing, or do you want to move on to the next one on our list?
The Thing. My final thought on that would be that if you have the means, watch the commentary because they are so funny. They're clearly best friends at that time when they recorded. I don't know if they still are, but they just were cracking each other up. Kurt Russell laughs so much. It's a joy to listen to.
He's a joy to listen to usually. Yeah. I've just listened to a number of interviews with him about all sorts of projects, and he seems like a super present, fun-loving interview.
Yeah, he does.
Or at least the ones that I've watched.
Right. And they just, they are fun. They also talk a lot about making the film, obviously, and you can tell they're both people who love the craft. They really care, and the way they talk about it is very thoughtful. And, they had a real... Why can't I think of the word? But they had
I've already made up a term this episode, so you're in the clear.
They had a real strong working relationship in their handful of films. So they are, they're solid as hell, and I love listening to it. And you know, the Big Trouble in Little China one is almost leans too much in the direction of them just being bros. Like, there's not a lot of information on making the film, but the Thing one is great, and you should listen to it.
Now I'm caught up in the idea of just making like a dictionary or like a like a what's it called at the end of a thing where you explain all the words.
Oh,
No?
we are so amazing. Like a key, like an index.
And yeah, something like that. I
Something
feel like
like
there's a
that?
different word for it.
There might
a
be.
word that we could just make up now and add
Yeah.
to that list because like a Golden Globes, Hanra, and now whatever the heck I said at the beginning of this episode that I've
Handfew.
already forgotten. Handfew. Handfew. We're going to continue through our handfew and touch on They Live right now.
They
so
Live.
I hadn't watched They Lived in a while. I think the last time I watched it was when I went with Erlinger to the Mile High Horror Film Festival when Child Eater, the short film, played there.
Oh, wow.
Because the cool thing, if you've never been to a super small local horror film festival, is that they will often go out of their way to praise and honor all of the older things that have gotten us there to
Yes.
begin with. And that film festival in particular wound up attracting a lot of talent that wanted to be there in support of their film. It was just it was a great celebration of a mixture of the iconic classics and all this new stuff that we could check out. And one of the things they screened there was They Live. And I hadn't watched it in so long, and it's crazy because I have these really big gaps in times when I revisit that one. And every single time I watch it, it's like the second he puts on the glasses and you get the first look at all of those, the aliens out there, it's like a punch to the gut all over again. Because they take so much time to just set the stage before they get to anything super crazy, and I always appreciate that.
Yeah, that's one. I think you can tell too that was offered to Kurt Russell, that role.
Oh
and
my God, without a doubt.
Yeah,
Without a doubt.
But it's fun to see someone else play that part with Carpenter, and you know, because of who we ended up getting, we also ended up getting the 6-minute fight scene, which is all kinds of.
That is like.
ridiculous.
That's another thing where it doesn't matter how many times I've seen it. Every single time we get to that moment, I'm like, oh, it's still going. No, it's still going. They're still going just to put on a pair of sunglasses.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
And I don't. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think that happens without Roddy Piper playing.
No, I wouldn't think
character.
so.
Yeah, I don't know.
He's got like a real charm to him too.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, we're basically sitting here comparing him to Kurt Russell, which is a really high bar to hit.
Yes,
but
it is.
I think he does a very good job in this movie for what that role is.
I think he's great. So this is where I always get in trouble because I think it's like a really great film and I love watching it.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't be in my top 5 Carpenter, actually. Like, it would be more in the middle to 10 area.
I think it would just fall out of my top 5.
Yeah.
But not by much.
Yeah. No, it would be probably 7 or 8 or something like that, closer to 10. I don't know. I think it's really, really great, but every time I rewatch Carpenter's films, I just think there are other films that are less celebrated that are actually better made.
Yeah. No, that's a fair point. I also think this is probably one of the ones on his resume that is screaming for a remake.
Oh, my.
What could you imagine nowadays
Yeah.
with all the new sets of problems we have and all the other things you could possibly see if you put on a pair of those sunglasses? It seems like a worthwhile remake to me.
Yeah. Well, that's something else I love about this film is sort of a relentlessly political film in the midst of being super goofy. Mm-hmm. And it's, you know, John Carpenter is not the guy to apologize for his politics. He's very upfront and he, you know, he wants people to take responsibility for their consumerism and their culture and their country. And I think that's great. And he does it in a way that's really fun and
entertaining.
Entertaining and will appeal to most people.
Yeah.
Unless maybe you're an advertiser or...
Well.
Yes, or...
Who knows? Maybe people in that field will still get a kick out of it. But yeah, you know, that's kind of what I wouldn't mind seeing a little more of is movies that blend, you know, any sort of commentary like that with entertainment value because... Really, that's kind of one of the best ways to send any sort of message out there. If someone is thoroughly entertained, they're probably more open to jumping into the movie and having fun with it while actually digesting what it's giving them.
Right, which is, you know, why Get Out was such a huge success because they did the balance really well.
That's a great comparison, actually.
Well, thanks.
Oh, job well done. Can we move on to the next two?
Yeah.
So all right, here. This is how we move on to the next two. So They Live gets knocked out of my top 5. These two that we're going to cover right now have a spot in my top 5. Actually, one's kind of wavering. But the one that's not wavering that we have left to talk about is The Fog. I freaking love The Fog.
I love The Fog.
Love The Fog.
It's so good. It's really, I think I've said this on one of our previous episodes, it's like one of the perfect movies to watch this time of year. It does just feel like a spooky ghost story.
It's
told
a ghost
around
story.
a campfire.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
It's a super simple, like really quick watch ghost story. It's so much. It really is. Of all the movies that we have on this list, if I have to give one the fun branding, I think it would be The Fog.
Well, the fun would go for me to Big Trouble in Little China. But fair enough.
I'm not on the same. I don't have 2 firm feet planted on the Big Trouble side of the divide. But
I get that. This is a fun, spooky movie.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, typical with Carpenter. It's got some super strong visuals throughout that still hold up on multiple rewatches to this day. Some really beautiful imagery, actually, and a great ensemble. Like, I always forget how damn good this ensemble is, where it's such a big ensemble, and I forgot what I was just talking about with the same. It's a recent release where I was complaining that I liked one part of an ensemble so much that when I was ripped away from it and put with somebody else that I didn't like as much, it was kind of like, oh, I want to go back there, you know? But with The Fog, and I think really with any ensemble movie, this is a great thing to achieve, is when you love everybody in the group so much that you could bop around from group to group, and rather than missing another character, one winds up enhancing the other and increasing the momentum of the whole thing. And especially in this kind of situation, when all these characters that are super cool that you're enjoying rooting for, when they all come together, it just makes for a super climactic finish.
It does. I agree. I got distracted in the middle trying to think of what you could have been talking about.
I know what it is, but I'm going to save it for a future episode of this podcast.
Ooh, okay.
I think you know what it is now, don't you?
I do, actually, now that you said that.
Okay. Glad we've cleared it up between ourselves and teased a future episode of The Witching Hour.
Tune in
maybe next week.
Yeah, they're great. And I was going to bring up the performances as well, because it's just another example of how great Carpenter is with actors. He, I would love to know why actors love working with him so much, but it's very obvious that they do, because they return and they return and they return. And they also give great performances in his films that make their careers often.
I mean, you definitely have a lot of returnees in this movie too, and it's a thrill to see some of that. I mean, whether you're talking about family coming together in this, or maybe people from Halloween. Also, he's so good with kids too. I forget what the kid's name is.
Oh, I would never know
this, that. But I think the child performance in this movie also works better than it probably has any right to.
Yeah, kids. I love them.
Can you tell there was sarcasm in there?
Who can ever tell with me? The other, right, and yes, as you said, it's so beautiful, and it's it's same cinematographer he had on Halloween, same one he had, I believe, on Escape from New York, and many of his films in that period where I was saying, find me a better stretch of films from any filmmaker. Yeah, he shot with Dean, whose last name is escaping me.
Cundy.
Thank you.
Jurassic Park.
Yes. Well, see, he's the best.
He really is. I mean, we could probably do an entire episode on his work as well, because that's a significant filmography there.
Yes.
Speaking of which, weren't we trying to get him in for? Oh, it was when they were doing all the Halloween stuff leading up. Yeah. I don't even know what happened to that. I probably should have followed up and never did. Yeah, Dean, if you're listening, you have an open invitation to The Witching Hour. Yes. We will happily have you. If there's nothing else to add about The Fog, I'll bring in this next one that I've had a change of heart about a little bit.
Okay.
So the last one we're going to talk about is Christine.
Yes.
I had a very similar feeling about Christine that I did The Shining, and it comes from the fact that I read the book after I saw the movie. And it's not that I don't love, let's say, The Shining anymore. I still love the movie. I appreciate it as an incredibly atmospheric haunted house movie that is super creepy. I love watching it, but then I read the source material, and then I realized there was a lot more to the book, certain elements that I found more interesting than what I got in the movie, and that made me, a little less enthused about The Shining the movie, but I still love it. Christine, I had a very similar reaction. See, Christine, especially watching Christine or rewatching it after having watched, in particular, They Live and The Fog. They're so even not necessarily Big Trouble, because Big Trouble has a very complicated, not mythology, but set of rules to it. It felt a little more robust than, let's say, They Live or The Fog, which is a very simple high concept that you just run with for 90 minutes. Christine is almost treated that same way, where it's like, kid falls in love with killer car, try not to die by killer car, and then try to stop killer car. Whereas, as anybody knows who's read any piece of Stephen King source material, it's not just that. It is that high concept, but in the middle of a significant amount of world building and character building, to the point that when whatever crazy climactic thing happens at the end, you feel like you've lived with those characters, and the movie never achieves that. But I don't think the movie was ever meant to achieve that, or I don't think it should have even tried, because we're talking about a 15, 16-hour audiobook compared to a 90-minute movie. And as far as a 90-minute movie goes, I still think Christine is a wild ride, and I enjoy it. But now that I've read the book, there's certain parts that I think could have been very cinematic that were not included.
Sure. I haven't actually read Christine. It's one of the Stephen King books I haven't read, but there is a challenge with almost all of his material in that he writes a lot, and he writes at length about tiny little things that no filmmaker could ever include. So I understand that feeling. I think, I like Christine. I'm not obsessed with it. It wouldn't be in my top 5. We're actually not talking about like a couple of movies that would be, but I'll just throw out right now, Assault on Precinct 13 is amazing.
Yeah, I haven't rewatched that one in a while,
It's
too.
so good.
I need to get on that.
It's really, talk about holding up well, because it was also early career when he didn't have the funds, and not that he had a lot of funds for Halloween. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's very down and dirty, great filmmaking. So Christine, though, was always just, to me, like a fun, goofy kind of thing. I don't know that I ever, when I was young and saw it, got past the killer car thing. But I did revisit it a couple months ago, and it was a lot better than I guess I had remembered it in my teenage self.
It's another example of a Carpenter movie that still looks good.
Yes, it does.
And when you basically have a car being smashed to bits and reforming itself, the fact that it still looks good when that happens is very impressive.
That is a very good point. Yeah.
I also never realized how many stars from that movie wound up having great directing careers. Like both the guys who played Dennis and Arnie are actually directing now. John Stockwell and Keith Gordon. I was very impressed by that one random fact that I happened to stumble upon yesterday while prepping for this show.
Good for them.
Yeah, good for them. But part of the reason why we wanted to save Christine for last is because now we just want to talk about, Carpenter interviews, experiences, all that kind of behind the scenes stuff. And recently, I had the pleasure of talking to him on the phone briefly for the new Halloween movie, and one of the things we got to talking about were the ideas of remaking things, because obviously with Halloween and its huge success, obviously we're going to be talking about the continuation of this iteration of the Halloween franchise. How many more slashers can you bring back? But also, John Carpenter movies have been remade before, and there's a good chance more are going to be remade now. And the one that I brought up to him, especially with the Stephen King craze, is Christine.
Yeah.
Christine seems like an ideal movie to bring back.
And it kind of goes,
well, when I said it to him, he goes, "Oh, you want more Christine? You might get it." I'm like, well, that is no surprise whatsoever. But, it kind of goes to the idea of, back to the Stephen King book thing, and especially also while we're talking about Dr. Sleep, the cool thing about remaking a Stephen King adaptation in particular is usually there's a lot more to dig into that was left out of the from the adaptation. And, with Christine, We don't really get a whole lot of the LeBay stuff in the movie, which is very interesting, but also would require a much longer running time. And there were even smaller details. Like one of the little things that stuck with me most from reading the book is there's a point in the book where excuse me, where Arnie has to move his car, and his parents aren't thrilled about the car to begin with. His dad goes out of his way to be like, listen, Arnie, I'm going to help you. And he pays to have Arnie keep the car at the local airport. And in the book, that's where the car gets smashed up. But it's just that moment between father and son, and, him as a father continuing to try to make that effort to be like, listen, this isn't going to work, but I'm going to help you as much as I can. That it just got me. And I wouldn't mind seeing more of that relationship brought to screen. And, why not do it in a remake?
Yeah. Well, we'll see. I mean, I find it very likely that will be remade, especially, the King and Carpenter
craze.
That's about to, I mean, we're in the midst of the King phase, but I think the Carpenter thing will definitely become more prevalent following the big buckets of money this weekend.
Oh, yeah.
But you never know what they're going to do with a remake, even though, because like we said, there's so much material in there that you can't do everything. I'm looking forward very much to the Pet Sematary remake. And
I'm so excited.
I know they're going to be putting things in there that weren't in the first film, but I also know that they're not going to be getting some of my favorite stuff, So...
Are you allowed to talk about it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, because your set visit coverage already went live.
Half. It was,
okay.
It was an introduction to
what are we not getting?
So, like this stuff, any in-depth exploration of the dynamic between, I can't remember their names right now, but the husband and his wife's father, for instance, which is one of my favorite kind of brutal, emotional elements in the book.
Oh, that's surprising.
Yeah.
So I guess they still could leave. Like the family could leave and get on the plane and go to see them, kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know the details of how it will or won't be presented, but when we spoke to Jason Clark, we were asking what was some of his favorite stuff that wasn't going to be in there, and he referenced, the really upsetting funeral scene, for example.
Oh, yeah.
Stuff like that. That is for some of the darkest stuff in the book and some of my favorite, but, understandable why it wouldn't make it to the film when you've got 90 minutes to 2 hours.
And, if they're going to maybe abandon stuff like that to beef up the relationship between Lewis and Judd, that's something I would take.
It's already pretty beefy, but
I guess.
Yeah.
Well, it's beefy in the movie, but I mean, if they're going to take away screen time for that.
Yeah. I'd like to see them invest more in the relationship with Lewis and Rachel, frankly, which I feel the first movie pretty much ignored for the most part, just made her straight up crazy.
Actually, that's a pretty fair complaint. I think that's another one where I've read the book more recently than I watched the movie.
Yeah.
And I have all that in my head right now.
It's so incredible.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
It's so good. Sticking with the remake question, though, if you were to pick something from Carpenter's resume to remake, what would you pick and why?
Ooh, let me pull up the IMDb real quick.
Did you like the Thing remake?
No, but I do think it's really sad that, sort of the famous thing is that they supposedly had really incredible practical effects that they did on set and everybody was very proud of, and then the studio painted them over with digital effects. So
we've seen that happen before, that's for sure.
I don't know if that would have made me like the movie more, but certainly when you're watching a remake of The Thing, which is known for like the best practical effects, some of the best of all time, that hurts.
Yeah.
Did you like it?
It's funny in bringing that question up to you. I was actually thinking about it on my way in this morning, and I remember, I've only seen it once. I only saw it, and I remember they were doing a big thing at New York Comic Con one year, and I was so excited to cover, and I remember not loving the movie, not hating it and being miserable during the watch, but walking out pretty disappointed, but I haven't revisited it since.
I haven't either.
It kind of goes back to what we were saying about scoring movies. It's, opinions change over years. You become a different person. Sometimes a movie can get better on rewatch. Sometimes it can get worse when you rewatch it, but
Things
could change. So maybe I'll put it on.
So I love that we do these like ranked lists that go online when you're like, you can go back a few years later and be like, well, who was I?
Well, how many times have you gone back and reread some of your reviews and been like, what was I thinking?
Right.
Because I do that too often now. And it's also because I'm obsessed with the Facebook on this day thing. Like sometimes it makes me sad and feel old, but then sometimes I just really like to see whatever I was writing about or tweeting about or interviewing on that very day.
That's nice. Facebook's evil. So
well,
I do, aside from work, try to stay off of it, but mostly just because it makes me sick to look at now.
Oh yeah, I can understand that.
So to answer your question, I think. So first of all, there already has been an Assault on Precinct 13 remake that was pretty solid.
Yeah, I liked that movie.
It was pretty good. I think that movie might be infinitely remakeable because of its simplicity. Like you could do another one in 10 years and I wouldn't be mad.
That's kind of like They Live, actually.
Yeah.
Like, could you imagine if we got a different They Live every single decade just to see
just to reflect the changing politics and culture?
Yeah.
That'd be good. That's a good idea.
I'd be open to that.
Do like Boyhood, but They Live.
Oh, God. What a comparison there. I could see it, though.
I would love to see another spin on In the Mouth of Madness.
Okay.
Which I think is like such an incredible film that doesn't necessarily fall short of its intentions, but I just feel like I would love to see a different filmmaker basically do their own version of Lovecraft. So maybe that's not even about Carpenter. I just want to see more Lovecraft movies.
Well, I would be open to both, more of that and more Carpenter movies.
Yes,
and I think he would too, because he'll say this in any interview. He'll basically say that I think any of my movies are remakeable, and I'll do it for the money. And at this point in his career, you know, who could be mad at him for saying that? He's here for a reason, and people want to remake his movies for a reason. Yeah. So if he has the luxury to get to do it and get paid for it, good for him.
I do agree that I think most of his films have a very remakeable quality. Yeah. Oddly enough, I think the one that might be hardest to do is Big Trouble in Little China, which
apparently is happening.
Doing a sequel
with
or something.
Rock?
Yeah. Talk about, different types of action heroes.
Wow.
Yeah.
After we just had that whole conversation about The Rock, I'm surprised I didn't think about that.
Yeah, that's a strange one for me. I don't know who else can get that tone exactly right, but we'll see.
Yeah, I don't know how much I'm looking forward to that one. And I promised you I would work in our weekend plans into this episode.
Oh, you did?
So you know how I'm going to do it. It's because I love rewatching a lot of Carpenter movies, but if you ever want to rewatch them for a very specific reason, I love the idea of comparing all of his scores. Like basically just sitting there and enjoying what's on screen, but really like sitting there and specifically listening out for how incredible his score work is. And it seems to me that that is the thing that nowadays excites him most, because one of the most interesting things about the conversation we had about Halloween is he seemed to turn on even more so when he was able to answer a question through his work in terms of the score. Like asking him his favorite scene, he's like, well, I'm trying to think of where the score was my favorite. Then I can answer your question. And, you know, he even flat out said towards the end of the interview something along the lines of, you know, like I'm tired. Movie making is stressful and I need to have all the right reasons to do it, to jump back into directing another film. And where his heart lies now is his tour.
Yeah.
And do you see where I'm going with this?
Now I do.
So this weekend, we might have attended a beer festival.
Yep.
And of the group there, 2 people had already bought tickets to Carpenter's show here in LA on Halloween night. Within maybe 30 seconds of somebody mentioning that, I used my phone, pulled my credit card out my pocket, and I might have bought a ticket. After I did that, somebody else might have bought a ticket. And after that... Oh, I thought Erlinger came first. So I was gonna give you like crown jewel honors, but
I got confused by the pointing.
Within a matter of minutes of the first person saying it, 3 additional people bought tickets, and that is how we're going to celebrate Halloween.
That's the power
we are going to go
Carpenter.
to John Carpenter's show.
And I've wanted to do it every year. This is the first year in many, many years that I'm not going to Portland for Halloween, and so I can finally do it. I'm so excited.
I am beyond pumped, and whatever episode comes next, we'll let you guys know what we thought about it. I think you're gonna have to wait until maybe the second Tuesday in November for that one.
That sounds right.
That makes sense.
Yep.
Because October is Wednesday the 31st.
Yes.
So the next episode would be the next Tuesday in November. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't wait.
I'm so pumped. Anything else, Carpenter, you want to bring up?
I mean, just what an incredible resume. Mm-hmm. And you were telling me, like, you know, I really took it easy on Sunday and I watched 4 Carpenter movies or 3 or however many you said in one day. Like, what a great day in your
4
life.
back to back to back.
What a
to
great
back.
day in your life.
It really, I mean, it really, really was. Also because as a diehard genre fan, to see all of the things that he's, I mean, really, who could say anybody started a particular thing? It's like there's always something that came before and influenced it, but there are very specific things to him as a filmmaker that so many people have tried to replicate throughout the years. And also this weekend with the huge celebration of Halloween. I mean, it is just, my heart feels full from seeing not just how many people went out and saw this movie, but also seeing Jamie Lee. Did you see what Jamie Lee Curtis tweeted about all of like the little factoids about Halloween success? Seeing all of that, and also how many conversations I had with just, random like listeners, viewers, friends I know who had never seen the 78 Halloween, and because of all the talk about this new one, went back and watched it for the first time and experienced it for the first time before they saw this new one. And I mean, that's the joy and the pleasure. I know we constantly roll our eyes of the idea, oh, why can't they make any original things? Like, why do we keep remaking and rebooting? This is the reason why, is because when it's done well, hopefully it could spread more love for something that someone out there might not have been exposed to begin with. So if you could use the remake as a tool to do that, I applaud it nonstop.
I don't think that's why. I think they do it for money.
I think money is definitely a priority
nice,
there, but
like, positive angle on it.
There is.
I don't. So that's just a false statement anyway. Why don't we do anything original anymore? Because if you look at the last 2 years, oh boy, have we. I mean, exactly. Hereditary, Get Out, A Quiet Place, these are all original, created horror stories that blew up and did great. So, it's nice that we also have these remakes. I mean, The Thing's a remake. It's always like the top of the list don't talk shit about remakes.
Or even you could talk about a classic like The Fly. The Fly is a remake.
Absolutely. And it's incredible. So, I think that's all very ridiculous. And if it takes... What happens, though, is that the remakes and the sequels, they take over for a while when the money-making becomes more important than taking a chance. So we'll see that happen probably in a few years, and everybody will be real cranky. But we'll get through it just like we do every decade.
That's what the movie making industry does, though. Yeah. It's like a whole bunch of highs and lows, and hopefully something good comes out of it on the tail end of one of those cycles.
Yeah, we'll get through like A Quiet Place 7, The Quietest Place, and then someone will come up with a new idea. Yes, exactly.
Then all of a sudden it'll be like The Deafening Place, and we'll all be okay.
Too loud of a place.
Yeah. Hopefully they do that with proper sound, proper Dolby sound. All right, that is it for this episode of The Witching Hour. And in case you are all upset that it was only 45 minutes, there is a reason.
Yeah, guys.
Because you're getting a double dose of The Witching Hour this week. So we have this John Carpenter specific episode for you, but that's not it. We are also doing a full spoiler review of Netflix's The Haunting of Hill House. So you've got this episode, then you've got that one. I hope you are happy with that. So technically, you kind of get a supersized episode this week. You just have to listen to it in 2 files.
Yeah, listen to them all together if you prefer, or listen to 245 chunks and feel like you got double your money's worth.
You know what else you can listen to make it an even longer Witching Hour week is my interview with David Gordon Green that went up. I believe it went up yesterday morning, actually. And it's a full 10-15 minute conversation, and we basically talk about some non-spoiler stuff about Halloween, but then there's a point where I say spoiler time, and we dig into some what I thought were really interesting spoiler points pertaining to the development and the making of the movie. So go check that out too.
And you know what? If you missed last week's special episode, listen to that too, because we did a spoiler review of Halloween and invited Mark Riley, and so we've just it's the end of October, we got you with content.
Yeah. And then you know what, if you're like me and before a good thing happens you're already afraid of it being over, which for me is Halloween the holiday right now. I'm already worried about what's happening when Halloween's over, and then it's all Christmas and Thanksgiving stuff in stores, and I'm already getting a little sad about that. But the thing is, The Witching Hour doesn't go anywhere.
That's
and
right.
we have so much genre to say. I can already think of a whole bunch of titles that are coming out in November that already gets me pumped.
I know, we've got a good lineup coming.
That we do. All right, so that is it for this episode of The Witching Hour. Haleigh, where can everyone find you on the internet?
You can find me on the internet at collider.com, where I run the horror content. You can find me on Twitter at Haleigh Fouch, which is my name. And you can find me on Instagram at Haystack McGroovy, which is something ridiculous I came up with.
We should talk about that sometime. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at PNemroff. Thank you guys, as always, for listening. You have officially survived The Witching Hour.